We've had a lot of rain in the last few days and many floods, but here right now it's not raining. It's very, very still. And I've been enjoying looking at the squares with you in during the last few minutes, and just appreciating the different qualities of light in your rooms. And I can see that for some people in the world, it's still daylight. Um, in Hawaii, in the central United States, it's still daylight in this amazing circle of time. So you might just want to take a few moments just to arrive and appreciate just looking at the squares in front of you and the people who are going to be your companions over the next few days. And of course, there are, I think, over two screens that you can look at. But just for a moment, just arrive in this uh, autumn time in the Northern Hemisphere, uh, in this dark autumn night in the UK, and just allow yourself to take a few breaths to arrive. I'd like to warmly welcome Flint to what I think is our fourth online retreat. I think we had two in 2020, and this is our second one in 2021. And the title of our retreat is The Circle of the Way, Continuous Practice. And I was struck by how Flint has continued to support us and continued to practice with us during this very strange time. We were going to be in Arnside today, all together in person, and here we are in the intimacy of this online experience over the next 3 or 4 days. So a warm welcome, Flint, and we're so delighted you can be with us. I looked for the first time at Dogen's The Circle of the Way continuous practice yesterday, and Flint's invited me to offer a few introductory comments about it. It's actually quite short, um, and when I first read it and I realized that I was going to be saying something about it, I did pause and allowed myself not to get busy with it, to take my time. And so I've read it through a few times, and it's very deep, and it's very, my sense of it is it's like a kind of watery flow of beauty. And it reminds me of when I first read The Four Quartets by T.S. Eliot over 45 years ago. And that's been a constant companion for me over that time. And it's revealed its treasures over many, many decades of the positions in the circle of life I've find myself in. And I've been returning to it um, because I wanted to think about circles, not so much what Dogen has written, because I know Flint's going to go into that in great depth, but start where I am. And I wonder how you relate to circles in your life, um, either in your art or in your mind or in your diaries. What are circles for you? I know in this house this year, Trudy's been creating a lot of ensos, the Zen circles, for the Just This website. And at one point, our kitchen was knee deep in ensos. While that's a slight exaggeration, they were everywhere. It was absolutely delightful to see that flow across the floor and the table um, and out into other rooms. So that's one of the recent experiences I've had of circles. And I'm aware that Trudy and her dear friends cast a circle in the Wiccan tradition at different times of the circle of the year. So I'm aware of what casting a circle is a little bit and the importance of that in the circle of the year. I'm also aware that I my inner landscape in terms of time has a number of interlocking circles. For me, the year is like a swirling clock with January and December at the top, and then all the months around them, and they all have different colors and flavors and different shapes. And I'm aware that when I think of time, for example, now where we are in October, which it is around 10 o'clock, I'm also aware of what balances it, which is usually our spring retreat at 4 or 5 o'clock. And they kind of interrelate all the time. So I'm always kind of aware of where I am in the swirl of a circle and how it relates to other times of the year. And there are other circles in my mind as well. And I wonder whether you have similar circles in your mind. The one, the one piece I've taken out of the Circle of the Way when I read it uh, is this, and I've chosen it because it resonated with the talk I offered on Tuesday in Inquiry. But this is the only one I want to take out at this point. Dogen says, because of this practice, there are the sun, the moon, and the stars. Because of this practice, there are the great earth and the open sky. And that really touched me as I read through the Circle of the Way in the last couple of days. That's the one piece that kind of drew me at this time. Returning to the four quartets, which, as I have said, is a poem which has accompanied me throughout my life and has a place beside my bed. That too is about circles and time, which were two of the preoccupations of Dogen. T.S. Eliot said, "What is the late November doing with the disturbance of the spring, and creatures of the summer heat, and snowdrops writhing under feet, and hollyhocks that aim too high?" So again, you have a time of the year and referring to another time of the year. And of course, there's perhaps one of his most famous lines is, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." So those are some of the kind of things that move in me when I think of circles, and perhaps not think of circles, but realize how embedded circles are inside my mind. One of the key phrases from the four quartets, which I often think about, and Eliot was talking about this life, and he said, "The hint half guessed, the gift half understood, is incarnation. The hint half guessed, the gift half understood is incarnation." I think sometimes half understood is good, but he thought of that as our human condition. So this weekend we have a precious opportunity together to turn towards those hints half guessed, those gifts half understood, together through our exploration of the Circle of the Way. When I offered my talk on Tuesday, one of our Sangha friends wrote to me and she said, really, the words just wafted through me. And I love that words can be released to not have a meaning which is pinned down. We can allow them to waft through us. And I thought of the reclining Buddha, who allows the winds and the rains and the feelings to move through them as they experience the world. So now we're going to hear a reading of the Circle of the Way, and there'll be an opportunity to recline inside whilst sitting upright and just allow the words to be met while they're being read. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josh. It's a pleasure to see on the screen in speaker view, with Claire spotlighting us. We're together on the screen, and it very much reminds me of those times of sitting in a more proper zendo and having the two seats of two teachers, or a teacher and a head student, sitting next to each other, and I can feel that in my body. It's such a nice beginning. And thank you for inviting me back. Thank you for having me continue with you. I want to make sure that we dedicate the goodness, we used to say in the old days, the merit of our practice, to all those teachers who have allowed us to be here, both seen and unseen, that we've studied with, and who have encouraged us and challenged us maybe. And it may be a formal teacher, but it may be your grandmother. It could be someone like Josh spoke about on Inquiry on Tuesday, a colleague, a mentor. And that also includes all of the people who are assisting you right now in sitting in front of the screen by taking care of a house or children or pets or work. That we're all supported in this circle of the way constantly. So I think it's a good idea to just appreciate that as we plunge in. As Josh said, we're going to begin by a reading of the piece, which I hope all of you have received. I will share it on the screen so you can follow along if you'd like. But hopefully you have this document, because we'll be referring to it throughout the retreat. And to enact the circle of the way, I want to have three people who have been in leadership positions in the Sanghas in the UK read. But before I do that, when Josh was just echoing some of the beautiful words from T.S. Eliot, it calls me to offer these few words from the great American poet and everyday farmer, Wendell Berry, and from a lovely essay which you can access if you want, called "What Are People For?" He says at one point, "We clasp the hands of those who go before us and the hands who come after us. We enter the circle of each other's arms and the larger circle of lovers whose hands are joined in a dance, and the larger circle of all creatures passing in and out of life who move also in a dance to a music so subtle and vast that no one hears it except in fragments." And so as we clasp each other's hands, as it were, and hear each other's voices, we can follow these fragments and find our way together over these few days of a precious time together. So I will share the screen for a moment. If you'd like to follow this. And this is a piece written by Eihei Dogen, Gyoji Dokan in Japanese, The Circle of the Way, Continuous Practice. And so I believe our first reader might be Catherine Ellis. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you, Catherine. And we'll just follow along, each person when it's time.
On the great road of Buddha ancestors, there is always unsurpassable practice, continuous and sustained. It forms the circle of the way and is never cut off. Between aspiration, practice, enlightenment, and nirvana, there is not a moment's gap. Continuous practice is the circle of the way. This being so, continuous practice is unstained, not forced by you or others. The power of this continuous practice confirms you as well as others. It means your practice affects the entire earth and the entire sky in the 10 directions. Although not noticed by others or by yourself, it is so. Accordingly, by the continuous practice of all Buddhas and ancestors, your practice is actualized and your great road opens up. By your continuous practice, the continuous practice of all Buddhas is actualized, and the great road of all Buddhas opens up. Your continuous practice creates the circle of the way. By this practice, Buddha ancestors abide as Buddha. None abide as Buddha, have Buddha mind, and attain Buddha without cutting off.
Because of this practice, there are the sun, the moon, and the stars. Because of this practice, there are the great earth and the open sky. Because of this practice, there are body, mind, and their environs. Because of this practice, there are the 4 great elements and the 5 skandhas. Continuous practice is not necessarily something people in the world love, but it should be the true place of return for everyone. Because of the continuous practice of all Buddhas of past, present, and future, all Buddhas of past, present, and future are actualized. The effect of such sustained practice is sometimes not hidden. Therefore, you aspire to practice. The effect is sometimes not apparent. Therefore, you may not see, hear, or know it. You should understand that although it is not revealed, it's not hidden. As it is not stained by what is hidden, apparent, existent, or non-existent, you may not notice the causal conditions that led you to be engaged in the practice that actualizes you at this very moment of unknowing. The reason you don't see it is that becoming conscious of it is not anything remarkable. You should investigate in detail that it is so, because the causal condition, the aspiration, is no other than continuous practice. But continuous practice is not limited by the causal condition.
Continuous practice that actualizes itself is no other than your continuous practice right now. The now of this practice is not originally possessed by the self. The now of this practice does not come and go, enter and depart. The word now does not exist before continuous practice. The moment when it is actualized is called now. This being so, your continuous practice of this day is a seed of all Buddhas and the practice of all Buddhas. All Buddhas are actualized and sustained by your continuous practice. By not sustaining your continuous practice, you would be excluding Buddhas, not nurturing Buddhas, excluding continuous practice, not being born and dying simultaneously with all Buddhas, and not studying and practicing with all Buddhas. Blossoms opening and leaves falling now is the actualization of continuous practice. Polishing a mirror and breaking a mirror is not other than this practice. Even if you might try to ignore it in order to hide a crooked intention and escape from it, this ignoring would also be continuous practice. To go off here and there looking for continuous practice appears similar to the aspiration for it, but it is like leaving behind the treasure at the home of your true father and wandering poor in another land. Wandering through wind and water at the risk of your life, you should not discard the treasure of your own father. While you were searching in this way, the Dharma treasure would be missed. This being so, continuous practice should not slacken even for a moment.
Thank you very much. It's so lovely to hear all of your voices. And to feel that we're walking together through this piece, hand in hand, as Wendell Berry said. It's just, for me, it's just a beautiful thing to just be awash in the words and hearing different voices, not being concerned about meaning so much, but feeling the fullness of what's being expressed. And over the next few days, we'll move deeper into this, open it up, let it move in a circle around us and with us and through us. It begins on the great road of Buddha ancestors. There's always unsurpassable practice, continuous and sustained. I have this image of walking on a great road, not like a highway. It's not like on the M1, but on maybe a lovely pathway, a walk in the. Even though it might not be large, it's the great road. Always continuous and sustained. When I've walked with so many of you, either maybe in the Peak District around Sheffield, some of you, or along the coast, not far from Lancaster, up into the lakes. Sometimes in Sussex along the shore or the woodlands in the south, in Devon. you can tell these paths are continuous and sustained. So many people have walked them. The road isn't actually a thing. It's an imprint of where people have walked. And Dogen's says it forms the circle of the way and is never cut off between aspiration, practice, enlightenment, and nirvana. You know, what we usually think of some line. There's not a moment's gap. Continuous practice is the circle of the way. These are just those first few words. And here we are, as Josh had mentioned, you know, facing this physical separation for our fall retreat, as the pandemic, along with other powerful currents, swirl around us. And practicing together in this way, and what sometimes we call the cloud Zendo, a meeting online, and using these technologies have given rise to such a variety of imaginative ways to experience the nature of our connected lives, this circle of the way. And for me, I think for probably many of you that I've spoken to the past many months, we have learned that physical separation does not necessarily mean being cut off, even if it's not ideal. Can you feel that our conscious intention and our embodied longing for loving connection reflects the unbroken circle of continuous practice? Our conscious intention, what we hope for, and that embodied longing is the enlivened reality of continuous practice, of the unbroken circle. Our awareness can place a spotlight on our everyday commitment to living wholeheartedly, no matter the circumstances. And even as we do face these painful limitations of physical separation, our practice continues right now, in this very moment, to support our vow to serve and protect each other. So we're never cut off. No matter the difficult experiences which we face all around us, and no matter what our painful personal perceptions and ideas are that arise in response to these challenges, we're still not cut off, even though we may think so or feel so. A meeting here like this, online in the cloud Zendo, practicing diligently together over the next few days, bringing all we've learned in this time of pandemic, along with our mixing it with our deepest aspirations for continuing our lives together. We are enacting continuous practice. We're walking the great road, the circle of the way. You know, this topic originally came forward because I was to be with you in person, as Josh had mentioned. I would have finished the last of my ceremonial aspects of Dharma transmission in late August, early September, and would have been able to travel. And so it was in my mind and my body and my consciousness and my life at the time we were planning about continuous practice, warm hand to warm hand, this circle. I also began to think that each of the sanghas where I teach, and in the last 3 weeks, I've led a retreat that was sponsored by the Awakening Together group in Minneapolis. Last week, the Open Door Zen community in Madison, Wisconsin, and now just this, the consortium of the Nothings in the UK. And there's so much overlap between these groups, and different people would come to more than one retreat, and different sanghas interlink because these are links in this unbroken chain of connection. And this has really come forward a lot more clearly and tangibly as a result of our technological connections and the events of the pandemic. At this very moment, there are participants from many of the sanghas enacting this unbroken link. And each sangha, I also began to think, is, on the one hand, its own kind of family. With each one has it as its own unique arc of development, each with its unique story. I mean, even within the Just This in the UK, and the original group in Sheffield, and then in Lancaster and other places, and then in the south in Sussex, and all around, each has its own arc of development and its own story, its own narrative. But like in an ordinary human family, each member of the family has their own interests and their own capacities, but they remain members of one family. And so each sangha develops its own, I would say, its own flavor, its own taste, its own fragrance. Yet they're all of, in the old Indian way, they're all of one taste. They're all in, from my perspective anyway, the Appamada family, the family of diligent care. And like each member of a vibrant family, each expresses its own personality and its own style, as we together attempt to find our way forward. And then as I circled back in my thinking to what was to be this fall, and the Delta variant of COVID-19 changed the trajectory of everything, and we were thrown back onto this sort of ever unfolding circle, not backwards simply along some linear track we hope to follow, even though it kind of feels like that. But like Josh was speaking about, it's more like a circle rather than a line. And it then feels like, to me, like this continual folding and unfolding and refolding, and then opening, and then stepping back, and then stepping in when we can, and stepping back out. That this is the actuality of what it's like to be together. And since this all began, like I said, with a reflection on lineage, and some of you have heard me speak about what we call the Kechi-Miyaku, the lineage papers in the Zen tradition, which looks a little bit like a line, but I've spoken about it, but I wanted to show you in some ways that what this looked like. This this is a little folded up parcel in some ways, which has all this beautiful writing on it that was done by Blanche. And you can see the stamp, which is called the blood vein of what's transmitted in practice. You can see it's not a line. It's a line, but it's interlaced. It's moving together like our circulatory system is. And around the outside, you can see bodhisattvas, Buddhas, ancestors. And this is, of course, about precepts. And there's the temple seal completely given, my name, the name of my teacher, these kind of things. And it's, if you haven't ever been in Japan or touched on things Japanese, they have a real thing for folding. You know about origami. these little packages are interesting to learn how to make. And then they hold the lineage paper. And the reason I'm showing it to you is not a it's not a kind of a showing off. There's something important. It's large, or my screen is small, and it's folded, infolded. Now it's being unfolded, just like we have been. And here's how it goes. You won't be able to read all of this, but you might be able to see that here at the very top with that same seal, it says, great teacher Shakyamuni Buddha. And then there are the ancestors in India. And there's a list of Mahakashyapa, with the flower, and Ananda, and it goes through the ancestors. And then as it goes further down, there's in China, there's the sixth ancestor, Hui Ning, and all the other ancestors that go on either side. And in the center, it comes back around. You can't see all these lines, to Dogen. Then it goes down the center here in Japan and ends up the very bottom. And I see the names Shogaku Shunryu, which is Suzuki Roshi. And the line circles to Gyokujin Soan, which is Huitsu Suzuki, that's his son, who's now the abbot. And the line moves to Hakuryu Sojin, which is Sojin Mel Weitzman. And the line curves around to Shunbo Zenkei, that's Blanche Hartman. And the line curves around to Ji Gen Koshin, which is my Dharma name. And at the end, from that last name, oops, it's hard to hold, which the lineage is hard to hold. The line comes around, 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 and it goes back up to the circle of Shakyamuni Buddha. So it's the ancestors forming the great road, the great circle of the way, and it's understood as this circle. Because this is our way. This is how it's understood. But I think today, as we're orienting ourselves to these teachings, I show you these kind of things and speak about these kind of things to help us ask the question, what is it that's embraced by the circle of the way? And in another fascicle by Dogen, which we're not studying this time, and I was mentioning to the organizing team, it might be a beautiful text to study when I come in the fall, hopefully, predictably, I might be able to get there. I said, I'm not canceling again. The four embraces. And the four embraces that Dogen speaks about in that fascicle, which is not necessarily the one we'll be studying, is offering, kind speech, harmonizing conduct, and intimacy in action. But that whole fascicle ends with this phrase: embrace, within embrace, within embrace, within embrace. And that really touches me because it feels like this circle, continuous circle, continuous folding and unfolding. One of my students in Minneapolis wrote this as a reflection on this entire piece of the four embraces. And listen how beautifully and precisely it expresses what we're up to here and how we're embracing each other as we enter into this retreat. He wrote The Four Embraces. This is from Christopher Johnson. The Four Embraces, aspects of a bodhisattva's relational practice, presents four embracing dimensions of awakened action and care for the world. So there are four dimensions of awakened action and care for the world. These four embraces might also be thought of as a means of liberation or a means of loving beings. These are means by which enlightening beings, he didn't say enlightened beings, these are means by which enlightening beings integrate with the world and also integrate people together into a land of energetic, wakeful care. I love that phrase. With as much, I think, discouragement and despair so many of us have had in looking out in the landscape of our cultures and societies and politics, it's a beautiful thought to say that these are means we have at our disposal in our practice by which enlightening beings, that's us, integrate with the world and also integrate people together in a land of energetic, wakeful care. It'd be nice if that was the description of our societies. These are means by which bodhisattvas meet and greet, welcome and guide all beings into the vast, wide open, boundless field of the awakened way. Welcome and guide all beings to the vast, wide open, boundless field of the awakened way. It's action which removes illusory barriers to embodied communion and authentic connectedness, fostering vibrant community and social harmony. It's the bodhisattva art, and I love that he used the word art. It's the bodhisattva art of spinning threads of radical aliveness and transcending the legacy of burdensome separation in our supposed individual lives. Awakening all to the intimacy of interbeing. And speaking as an American, at least, and our having recently beginning painfully to become more and more to a reckoning of our history, for example, of slavery, transcending the legacy of burdensome separation, awakening to the intimacy of interbeing. But we all have these, don't we, in our lives? So I think when I show you the traditional document and the folding and unfolding, and think about the way we are folding and infolding our lives together, this is in the service of removing artificial separations, connecting. But it leaves me with a question. What is left outside if it's not all embraced in this circle? And maybe more importantly, who is left out? Because, I'll say rather emphatically, if anything or anyone is left out or left behind, then it's not true practice. If anything or anyone is left out or left behind, then it's not true practice. Instead, what we may realize we're practicing is based on personal or maybe group choices and preferences, sometimes quite intentional, but often unintentional. And we may hold them quite explicitly or implicitly. But these are all based on artificial distinctions, even though they're deeply held, along with our unexamined delusions, sometimes just simple ignorance, And so often all of it undergirded by fear. And that foundation of fear, along with ignorance and unexamined delusions and these distinctions, if it's big enough, leads to willful ignorance and even violence. And unfortunately, we see so much of that in our world these days. So stepping back even further a little bit, maybe the circle of the way is more like a spiral, always deepening down into the shadowy human world, while at the same time turning upward into the light of the world of freedom. But it's continuous, this pulsing, circling. And although we may not be continuous, the Dharma doesn't falter. We falter. And we get back up as we navigate the Great Road. But this is not, as I say that, I can hear these echoes of my Christian background saying this sounds like sin, backsliding or fault. That's not at all what I'm suggesting, because that suggests a kind of a failure and a corruption around which one should feel guilt or shame and then recover. I'm talking about we are immersed in the great circle of the way, which is going on, and we notice it or we don't notice it. We are awake to it or not awake to it, but it sustains and cares for us at all time. That's the radical aliveness that I was speaking about. And this may be actually another way of speaking about, I've always taught, all of you have heard me speak about what I call the double helix of maturity. Growing up and waking up, our personal development, our spiritual development, which is, I think, is a lovely and useful way of thinking about this. But maybe we need to include not just growing up and waking up, but growing down into greater intimacy with the depth of our animal embodiment and waking down into the depths of endarkenment, the shadowy world that's not quite in our everyday awareness. And then also there's this growing outward and waking outward, where we open and encircle and include, as we become, through practice, this larger and larger container for life energy. And so this double helix, I think, it's important to expand. There's not just the upness, but the downness and the wideness. Maybe suffering is just the word we use to describe a break, a perceived break in continuous practice in the circle of the way. And one of the beautiful things of Zen forms, which we are just able to do barely in this kind of situation, are always pointing us back to the circle. For example, if you're chanting in a temple, not reading, but actually chanting. So there's so many of you haven't experienced this. It's really quite beautiful to me in my devotional way of practice. If you're chanting in a Soto temple, there's a person who takes the role of what's called the kokyo. It'd be like the cantor in a synagogue, or that announces what's going to be chanted next. And they would announce the chant with a variety of tones which would suggest the range in which it will be chanted. Like if we were going to chant the Inmei Juku Kanan Gyo, which is the chant that we do for well-being, they might say, Inmei Juku Kanan Gyo, and it's a beautiful kind of chant. It's like, okay, there's our range. And then you begin to chant. If you're chanting the Heart Sutra, In Japanese, the monosyllabic way is easier. We go kanji, zaibo, satyo, and everyone is chanting along with the mukyugyo, making a sound. Well, at some point you have to breathe, right? You have to take a breath. And my teachers always said, luckily, there's enough of us that we don't take a breath at the same moment, so the chanting is never broken. I may take a breath while someone else is chanting along, then they take a breath, and so that it's never broken. When we read something and we use in English, let's say, and we're using our normal intonation, we might say, Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, when practicing Prajnaparamita, clearly saw, and there are breaks. But the practice suggests that we make sure there's no break. When we walk, that's why Kinhin is different than walking meditation. There are beautiful practices, which I wholeheartedly use and suggest, where we can walk alone, back and forth, or in a circle, on our own, and do beautiful walking meditation. But that's different than Kinhin. In Kinhin, we prepare ourselves to walk, and we do that strange thing of we start looking at the distances between each other, because we're forming a circle. And we want there to be breathing space, but then we want connection. And then we begin to walk slowly and carefully as one without breaking the circle. And we're walking with, we're not walking separately. And these are just some examples which many of you have engaged in, but I want you to remember that this is the enactment of the circle of the way, of unbroken practice. That's why we do it that way. It's not because that's holy or makes you a good Zen student. It's the enactment of the unbroken circle. But it keeps bringing us back to the question, can it really be broken? This is a much bigger question. Now, on the surface, practice is actually pretty boring and sometimes difficult. I'm not supposed to say that as a teacher, right? It can be very boring and very difficult sometimes. And without continuity and relationality, it has no beauty. That's where it becomes alive, through its continuity and relationality. And that beauty comes through the intimacy. This is an important thing to remember. It's only felt as boring if we hold it as some instrumental activity that we're doing or some tool that we're using for personal gain, and then evaluating in contrast to something else, which would be defined as more interesting or more useful, somehow better, for our own personal experience. But that's not practice. That's not Zazen, at least. So without continuity and relationality, there's no beauty, no intimacy. And practice is really helping us find, in some ways, I think, the shape of reality as it unfolds in an ongoing, relentless way, and to find the shape of reality and accord with it. And that's why we offer our bodies to a posture in Zazen, to our walking in Kinhin, to our voices in chanting, to our bowing. Because we are all shaped by practice to support us in being an expression of ultimate reality in embodied form. And we know that we're limited, and yet we're expressing the unlimited. But how does the unlimited show itself? is through our limited form. We chant in the Heart Sutra, form is emptiness, emptiness is form, or form is boundlessness, boundlessness is form. It's reminding us of this continuous shaping and being shaped. In fact, maybe the only thing that is continuous is true practice. Maybe that's what is continuous only. But our activity is what's required for us to realize it and express it. It's like a generator, that's providing electricity, and you turn it on and then the light bulb comes on and your floods, you lose power. Maybe you got a generator and you turn it, and it's like the generator is like our practice. And the light bulb lights up. The activity of practice brings light. The lived activity of Dharma. And there's a name for that lived activity. And those are the precepts, which I know you've been studying. And many of you have been in the class maybe once or more at times to study the precepts deeply. I want to read a short piece which was given to me. It's the only thing that was given to me when I began to study the precepts. I wasn't given textbooks or great treatises on the precepts or commentaries. Blanche handed me one small thing by Kobanchina Roshi, and you have it in your class, you've read it. But I want to read it now, and I want us to hear it in the light, literally the light, of what I'm reflecting on today, setting the stage for our study of continuous practice. So these are the words by the late Kobanchina Roshi. He says, the main subject, and he's speaking of taking the precepts and the Bodhisattva vow. The main subject is how to become a transmitter of actual light, life, light. Practice takes place to shape your whole ability to reflect the light coming through you and to regenerate your system so the light increases its power. Each precept is a remark about hard climbing, maybe climbing down. You don't use the precepts for accomplishing your own personality or fulfilling your dream of your highest image. You don't use the precepts in that way. The precepts are the reflected light world of one precept, which is Buddha's mind itself, which is the presence of Buddha. And Zazen is the first formulation of the accomplishment of Buddha existing. The more you sense the rareness and value of your life, the more you realize that how you use it, how you manifest it, is all your responsibility. We face such a big task. So naturally a person sits down for a while. It's not an intended action, it's a natural action. So this is quite beautiful. The piece that I read about the four embraces and this piece by Koban, maybe I'll put those in a handout and send it so you can all have them, because they're dense, but they're quite extraordinary. And once again, this isn't a retreat just on the precepts, but the precepts are, as he said, they're really just an expression of how to enter the Bodhisattva vow, which is the great circle of the way. And Koban is using this poetic image of becoming a transmitter of light, of life light. As the Buddha said, become a light to yourself. And he says, practice takes place to shape your whole ability, to reflect the light coming through you. to become a larger and larger container for life energy to flow and to generate and to regenerate, like the image I was saying of your system, so the light increases its power. What is this light? That's what we'll be studying. Each precept as a remark about hard climbing, maybe climbing down, not elevating yourself, climbing down into your life fully, as I'm saying of our helix and our spirals. You don't use the precepts for accomplishing your own personality. This practice, awakening, isn't to become a more sort of purified personality. And it's not about fulfilling your dream of your highest image. It's relinquishing those images of purification and finding your way to accord with life as it is. He says you don't use the precepts in this way. And then those kind of perplexing statements. The precepts are the reflected light world of one precept. The precepts are like facets of a jewel. They're the reflected living light of this world, of one precept or one way, which is Buddha's mind itself. That's what we're living in and as, which is the presence of Buddha, of awakening, not some historical guy in India, of your own true nature. And Zazen, our practice of sitting, and what the sitting practice points to beyond the physicality, is the first formulation, the first form. It's a form of the accomplishment of Buddha existing. In other words, it's the way we enact the embodiment of Buddha, which is our nature, and to express it. And he says, the more you sense the rareness and value of your own life, the rareness and value of our own lives. And as we've watched so many people die, so many people be harmed during the pandemic, and there in the UK, you've had a shocking loss of one of your own dear Sangha members. The more we sense the rareness and value of our own life, the more you realize that how we use our lives and how we manifest this is our responsibility. This is what we're given. That's why we take our vows. That's why we practice. And then he says, rather, I think it's kind of comical in some ways, but beautiful. We face such a big task, so naturally a person sits down for a while. It's not an intended action, it's a natural action. In other words, it's not some posturing of our personality to become a Buddhist. It's a natural action. You want to ground yourself in your life. And in that space of silence, find the deep wisdom that's in that depth of silence and express it as a way of enacting the great circle, the way of demonstrating the great road, to continue the way, continuation of the way. I think you probably remember the phrase that I will sometimes use, which was taken from a statement by Katagiri Roshi when asked, what is a vow? When we vow to continue in this way. And he says, what's the one thing that you do under all circumstances? What's the one thing you don't let go of? It's continuous. And if you're honest with yourself, you can look at what are the things that you do under all circumstances. Overwork, take a nap, watch Netflix. Those are all things I do. It's just, are they the one thing you do under all circumstances? What is the thing that you come back to when everything else falls away? And that's a good question to live with. Along with the definition that you've heard me use of discipline is remembering what you want. Not what you want for the highest image of your personality. What is your inmost request, your deepest calling? And these are not questions to answer quickly. but they're ones we will sit with through the next few days. The continuous cycle of breath by breath, breath by breath, the continuous circle of the embodied way. So maybe that there are enough words for now.